To My 9-Year-Old Self by Helen Dunmore is a fairly straightforward poem in the collection, very charming, about looking back and writing a letter verbally to your 9-year-old self. Helen Dunmore, by the way, is a fantastic writer, poet. Her poems often come up as the unseens in A-level exams, so it's worth having a look at her for her poetry for unseen. She's also a wonderful novelist and passed away much too young, I'm afraid. Was a great writer. So let's have a look at what she does in To My 9-Year-Old Self. So it's written in free verse, which gives it a conversational tone. It's informal due to the lack of kind of formal metre and rhythm. So free verse with a conversational tone. And you've got a kind of adult intruding onto their childhood self. Now, in one way, that's really simple. It's a nice kind of conversation of the adult self talking to the younger self. But for much of the poem, they're kind of apologising for the damage that they've done to that child. So sometimes they're talking about the physical damage that they've done to their child's body. And there's also kind of some hints at trauma. But on the whole, it's a nostalgic poem. And many of the poems in the collection aren't they? So remember that means you're likely to get an unseen that covers those themes. So look for those themes of kind of innocence and nostalgia. And the poem begins with an imperative, but a command, you must forgive me, but one which is also an apology, you must forgive me. So the adult self is confronting the younger self and kind of demanding or begging for an apology, and we'll find out why further into the poem. And this Caesura here really highlights the heightened emotion in asking for that or commanding that apology. Don't look so surprised, perplexed and eager to be gone. So that triplet there of things that they're describing the younger person as being surprised, perplexed, which means puzzled, and eager to be gone. So it shows that this poem, this letter to the 9-year-old self, is all about what the adult needs rather than what the child needed, which is quite an interesting reversal of power, isn't it? And what that younger person wants to be doing is going off and being active, balancing on hands, tightrope. You'd rather run than walk, rather climb than run, rather leap from a height than anything. So you've got the repetition of this modal verb here, rather, which suggests their deep desire to be really, really active when they were a child. So that modal verb heightens childhood. I'll put vivacity, that desire to be really lively. And also it's a triplet, and notice how it kind of builds up in intensity. Run rather than walk, but climb rather than run, and leap from a height as well. So it sums up the childhood's kind of ambition, really, really lofty ambitions, high ambitions. To run fast, to climb high, which could be metaphorical, couldn't it, for having success. And then in the second stanza, we get this very straightforward sentence, I have spoiled this body we once shared. And you've got an end stop here. So it's a simple, complete statement. Almost like a confessional, isn't it? I think with that end stop, I have spoiled the body that we once shared. Notice at this point in the poem, so the poetic voice considers them as separate from the child at this point, like they're separate entities. Look at the scars that watch the way I move, careful of a bad back or a bruised foot. Now, this is interesting, the idea that they're commanding again. So the adult is considering themselves in charge, but they're also commanding the child to observe, which again is a reversal of power, I would suggest. Normally it's adults observing children and watching them and taking care of them and making sure, but here we've got this reversal of power where they're asking their child to observe themselves as an older person. Careful of a bad back or bruised foot, so you've got that B sound, haven't you? There, so you've got that alliterative B. And remember with sound devices, what you do is you think about what the sound implies. There's a number of ways you can interpret a b, b, b sound. I think it's useful here to us to see it as suggests discomfort or sort of staggering or doddering along. But it's like someone kind of limping along, isn't it? So you think about what the sound device might suggest in terms of tone, and then you use it to support your argument. And I'm suggesting that when the child observes the adult, they'll notice them not walking particularly well because they now have a bad back or a bruised foot. Do you remember how 3 minutes after waking, we'd jump straight out of the ground floor window into the summer morning? Now here there's a change in tone, isn't it? Because I has become we, and that continues into the next stanza as well. So we've got a kind of merging of the older self and the younger self as they jump out of a winter together, and it's really funny, isn't it? It's just like an easy passage where you've got the girl jumping out of the window to be with the other girl. It's like her older self. And again, this idea of liminal space, of passing through a window or a door, a transition from childhood to adulthood, and they made that transition together. And she carries on with we, and they jump into a summer morning. So it's what I'm going to call a halcyon, so an idealised childhood, which adds to that tone of nostalgia. So they went off together into something warm and sunny and lovely. And carrying on with that dream we had, so again it's a collective dream, something they both wanted. No doubt it's as fresh in your mind as the white paper to write it on. So the white paper here is almost a metaphor for that unspoken future that the child has, unblemished future. So the white is kind of innocent, and it's as yet unmarked, isn't it? Undefined future. So they've got this kind of blank future in front of them at this point. We made a start, but something else came up. And you've got that dash there, which I think suggests distraction. So as they were making a plan for their future when they were little, and then things keep coming up to distract them and get in the way of that, and that punctuation mark suggests that, I think. You could say that there's almost a tone of regret there, that the older self wishes they'd carry on with the plan, and the dashes suggest a regret or a kind of ruefulness, which means looking back with regret. And look what came up: a baby vole, a bag of sherbet lemons, and besides, that summer of ambition created an ice lolly factory, a wasp trap, and den by the cesspit. And besides there, which is a discourse marker, so as well as that, it suggests that there was a tangible product of all the things she was doing as a little girl. It wasn't completely wasted time, because she actually created things. It's very sensory as well, isn't it? You know, the tang of the sherbet lemon and the idea of ice lollies, you can almost picture them kind of sticky and brightly coloured, can't you? A wasp trap, which makes you think of being stung. Why would you want to build a wasp trap? I don't know. And a den by the cesspit, which is somewhere where waste matter is stored from your toilet, which is horrible, isn't it? It's very sensory, but notice as well that there's a kind of gradual degeneration in what she was making as a child, or noticing. Degeneration. So you start with something small and cuddly and warm, a little baby vole, and then tangy sherbet lemons, and then an ice lolly, all of which are nice, but then suddenly we're trapping wasps, and we're by a cesspit. So rather like growing up, things degenerate. It's a kind of extended metaphor for that, isn't it? That things get gradually worse, and then that continues. I'd like to say that we could be friends, and she's moved back there into first person, hasn't she? move back to ice, and the former her and the current her have sort of split again. And notice here we've got this Caesuras and ends stops here, which suggests that separation. Beyond a few shared years, Caesura, I won't keep you then, end stop. So she's now split from her younger self. Time to pick rose hips for twopence a pound. Time to hide down scared lanes from men in cars after girl children. And just like the last stanza, there's a kind of degeneration here. So she's talking about how then the little girl thought there was plenty of time. And in this anaphora of time to, there's an irony, isn't there? Because she knows, as an adult, she doesn't actually have that much time. Looking back, she knows that time will go quicker than the younger self realises. Rose hips, as well, I think really date this poem and make the memory seem exactly that, a memory, and archaic, because rose hips are a fruit that rose flowers grow out of. You find them in hedgerows. Very few people now would pick rose hips for themselves. It's quite an old fashioned. You can make a drink out of them. And they're supposed to be soothing, like to babies, but very few people would pick them themselves, and very few people drink rosehip cordial anymore. And twopence, of course, is in old currency, so it makes it seem archaic now, more like a memory. And here we get time to hide down scared lanes from men in cars after girl children. So first of all, we've got an idea of kind of incipient danger here. You didn't realise at the time what danger you were in. And we've got hyperlage here, haven't we, or transferred epithet, that the lanes are scared. So big is the danger that it's actually bled out into the street. So hyperlage and transfer epithet are the same thing, it's just a different term for the same thing. And it continues